That morning, the sky over Annapolis was the color of cooling steel. Wind from Chesapeake Bay slammed against the glass, leaving streaks of salt like the tired breath of someone who'd just surfaced from underwater. I sat across from Victor Crane, Chief Operations Officer at Bayview Infrastructure, a man who entered every meeting like it was a stage, and the spotlight had already chosen him. On the table lay my promotion file, 20 pages thick, built from 5 years of sleepless nights and 3 hurricane seasons, now sitting neatly in his hands. Victor flipped through it like a restaurant menu, not reading, just scanning for anything that might surprise him. Finally, he looked up, his smile thin as a blade. Your work is adequate. Adequate. One word dropped heavy, cold, and final, like a bolt sinking into deep water without a sound. I didn't frown, didn't argue. I just smiled. Thank you. I'm glad we share the same dictionary. He froze for half a second, maybe surprised that anyone would say thank you after an insult. But I hadn't come here to flare up. I came here to remember. I walked out, past the glass door, engraved Director of Structural Integrity, the title that should have been mine a month ago. Inside, the chair was still empty, waiting for someone else to fill it. My hand slid into my coat pocket. The steel crack gauge was still there, cold, solid, exactly 190 grams. I'd used it during a 3 a.m. shift to measure the vibration amplitude on the Bay View Bridge's main beam during a storm. Now it was just silent metal, but I knew this much. In my world, the quiet things are the ones that tell the truth. The parking lot shimmered under the noon sun, carrying that sharp scent of salt. I sat in my car, closed the door, and let the silence fall like sand. In the rearview mirror, my face looked back, calm, not angry, not sad, just calculating. I didn't want to win by making noise. I wanted the system itself to reveal the cracks it had been painting over for years. Two decisions formed in my head, clean and metallic. First, cancel the trip to the Outer Banks. You can't watch waves while standing in a tide yourself. Second, stop writing the operations log, the handbook I'd maintained for 5 years, documenting every sensor code, every emergency shutdown protocol. No one had ever asked me to write it, but it was the invisible backbone of the entire infrastructure. If the company wanted adequate, I would show them what adequate really looked like. By afternoon, the air in the office felt heavier. People avoided my eyes, as if someone had taped a warning sign to my back. I said nothing. I simply packed up my drawings, backed up the data, and sent a short email. The final update of the operations log will be paused until further notice. Victor didn't reply. He never replied to things he didn't understand. Driving home, I crossed the Bayview Bridge, the structure I'd kept alive through 5 storm seasons. The wind slapped across the water, warping the reflection of its concrete pillars like a memory stretched too thin. I pulled into the maintenance lane, rolled the window down. The air smelled of steel, oil, and salt. The scent only engineers call the smell of a job well done. But today it carried something else, the taste of being forgotten. That night, I came home. Evan, my 12-year-old son, with brown hair messy, eyes bright as bridge lights, was mixing cookie dough. Mom, did you get promoted? I laughed, setting my bag down. No, sweetheart, I wasn't ready. At least not in their opinion. But you build bridges. They can't even do that. I rolled up my sleeves, pulling out the cookie cutters. Some bridges take time to stand tall, Evan, and some people need bigger storms to learn what standing tall means. We baked together. Butter melted and sweetness filled the kitchen. My phone buzzed a few times on the counter, screen lighting up and fading again. I didn't touch it. I just want to spend my time where it matters, I said. Evan didn't understand all of it, but he smiled and nodded. I realized then that my silence was teaching him something about patience, about strength that doesn't shout. Late that night, after he'd fallen asleep, I opened my laptop. The blue glow reflected on a cup of coffee gone cold. I deleted the entire promotion proposal document. No hesitation. Just a light emptiness, like wind slipping through steel. Then a new email appeared. From Harbor Span Institute. Subject: Interview invitation. Senior advisor, structural integrity. I read it 3 times. Harborspan, the independent oversight body that had once challenged a major project in Seattle, famous for integrity so fierce that even the state government tread lightly around it. We've been following your work on the Bayview project. We'd like to have a conversation. I looked out the window. The night wind carried the same salt air and the low hum of bridge cables in the distance. I didn't know what waited ahead, but I knew this. I wasn't leaving because they underestimated me. I was staying long enough to let the data, the steel, and the so-called adequate work speak for itself. If you've ever been told you're not ready, that your work is only adequate, tell me where you're listening from. Because somewhere, between salt air and silence, there are still people strong enough to make the world measure adequate all over again. 5 years ago, when I took over the maintenance division for Bayview Bridge, the only things handed to me were a rusty key and an empty folder on the server. No diagrams, no passwords, no mentor. The team used to have 5 engineers. Now it was just me. My predecessor had left without a word, taking the original blueprints with him. The sensors were 12 years old, cables tangled, data ports renamed in someone's handwriting. Every time I opened a log file, I had to guess where sensor 4B was on the actual beam. For the first 3 months, I didn't see the sky in daylight. I reprinted every old diagram, color labeled the bridge map, and marked each sensor and weld point. I called it a reverse autopsy, reverse engineering a body that everyone else had abandoned. At night, I climbed the main beam with a flashlight. Oil dripped from the bolts onto my wrist, cold as rain. I took photos of every crack, set the gauge against the steel, and wrote down the numbers by hand because the auto measure software had died years ago. One young engineer asked me, "You're redoing the entire system? You know they won't pay you extra." I smiled, voice hoarse. "I'm not redoing it, I'm doing it right." By the 4th month, I'd finished a new operations manual. Each color represented a beam type, each tag linked to inspection routines, and each QR code opened the real-time image of the sensor's location. I placed it in an orange plastic box, locked it, and labeled it System Core, updated by D. Moore. No one asked for it, but later, that box saved the bridge. One August night at 2 in the morning, I was home, getting ready for bed, when the old warning system buzzed. The sound was sharp and dry, not loud, but enough to pull me to my feet. I called the night shift. No one answered. Only the rain hitting the roof and the pounding of my heartbeat matched the rhythm of the sensors. I grabbed my raincoat and drove through the storm toward Bayview. The road was slick, signs blurred, red lights smeared into streaks. When I arrived, the bridge deck was empty, bathed in yellow light stretching into the dark. I climbed up the main tower to the same place where sensor 4B had shown a small anomaly 2 months earlier. The monitor flashed a vibration level 6% above the safety threshold. Not much, but enough to fracture the beam if winds reached 15 knots. I picked up the radio. "Close the lanes. Technical emergency." The guard hesitated. "But the governor's coming tomorrow morning. Are you sure?" "I'm sure." 30 minutes later, traffic stopped. My team and I walked along the beam and found a single loose bolt at the southern joint. Invisible to the eye, but the sensors had heard it. We tightened it, reinforced the area, and filed the report. By dawn, a small storm rolled through. The bridge stood firm. Not a single new fracture. At the emergency meeting that morning, Victor walked in like a man who'd saved the world. He stood before the executive board, pointing at the bridge map. We took proactive action, detected the anomaly, and resolved it immediately. I stood at the end of the table, listening to the word "we," and smiled. I knew what "we" meant. It meant him. Kayla Sloan, head of communications, quickly suggested an internal feature. Bayview weathered the storm. Project team shows exceptional reflex. The article went live that afternoon. Photo: Victor, arms crossed, staring at the bridge. Caption: Decisive leadership protects critical infrastructure. My name wasn't there. That evening, after everyone left, I stayed behind to put away the tools. The rain hadn't stopped. I opened the window and listened to the wind hum through the cables. On my desk was a small envelope. Performance bonus $400. I picked it up. It felt colder than steel. $400. The price of a sleepless night, a bridge that didn't collapse, and a woman standing outside the spotlight. I wasn't angry. I just made a note in my logbook. August 14th, bridge stable after storm. Data confirms structural integrity. No one read that log but me. A few weeks later, Kayla stopped by with her practiced smile. The article's doing great. Leadership wants to print it and hang it in the lobby. Good, I said without looking up. Don't you feel proud? I looked up, smiling evenly. I'm proud the bridge is still standing. As for who gets their photo framed, I don't handle aesthetics. She laughed awkwardly and walked away. At the time, my mother was in the hospital in Baltimore. Lung disease, recurring after years of remission. I spent my days driving back and forth between cities, mornings at the site, nights at the hospital, and late evenings helping Evan with homework. He loved drawing bridges. Every time he drew one, he'd ask, "Mom, what if the bridge falls?" I'd answer, half joking, half not. "Then I'll rebuild it. A bridge that can't take the wind doesn't deserve to be called a bridge." He'd nod and keep drawing. His bridges never collapsed. That winter, snow covered the deck. During inspection, I noticed a fresh coat of paint over the old anti-rust layer. Someone had repainted without reporting it. I took a photo and logged it. Material not replaced, only surface painted. I remember how it felt, like watching someone put makeup on a body that just needed rest. For 5 maintenance seasons, I repeated the same cycle: measure, record, inspect, patch, reinforce. No titles, no applause, just steel, oil, and wind. But the bridge stood, and I stayed silent, like one more piece of the structure no one ever noticed. Victor got promoted. Kayla became head of communications, and I stayed where I was, the woman with the steel gauge and eyes that saw every beam like a living vein. One June afternoon, as sunlight spilled gold across the bridge, Victor came over to shake my hand in front of the press. He said loudly, "Thank you to our amazing technical team for keeping the bridge safe." Cameras clicked. I smiled, said nothing. When everyone left, I pulled off my gloves, wiped the sweat from my face, and placed my hand on the cold steel beam. I keep the bridge standing, I thought. They keep the image standing. And as always, I went back to my small office on the ground floor, the one without a nameplate, but with a map showing every nail and every bolt I've ever touched. The bridge still stands, and so do I. I stayed, but I was no longer the one running around putting out fires every time someone forgot to close a valve. The first morning after the adequate meeting, I arrived at exactly 9 o'clock, not a minute early. The badge reader beeped, dry and flat, like a greeting with limits. I sat down and opened my work calendar. There was no line that said, "Fix someone else's mistake." No bullet for, "Prepare slides for the boss." No note that read, "Rewrite the summary so communications can present it." Only 3 items: check vibration data on schedule, update Bayview project reports, respond to requests within 48 hours. I did those 3 things, no more. At 9:17, Peter showed up at the door, safety vest still stained with paint, holding a contractor file. "Delaney, aren't you handling the bridge pad issue?" I looked up, voice calm. "Not in my job description." He stood there for a moment, waiting for me to elaborate. I didn't. He gave a slow nod and left. A few minutes later, whispers started in the pantry. Is she rebelling? No. Probably testing the rules. I smiled to myself. No rebellion, just a controlled power reduction. The office suddenly discovered that punctuality could be dangerous. The ones who came in 10 minutes late were called flexible, but me, arriving at exactly 9, had become uncooperative. Kayla from Communications stopped by with a smile already glued on. Hey, Delaney, can you glance over the internal bulletin? Just a few technical terms. I checked my watch. Send a formal request, Kayla. I'll respond when it's logged. You don't have to be so rigid, she laughed. You've always helped before. I helped when it mattered. Now it doesn't. Her perfume lingered in the air, like fresh paint over old steel, shiny but covering rust. At 10:30, the project meeting began. Victor walked in, tie crooked, voice booming like a man who just won an argument at a bar. Where's the summary? I don't see the simplified version for the report. I slid the file across the table. The full date is here. The summary belongs to Communications. The room went silent, like someone had cut the power. Victor narrowed his eyes. I recall you used to help with that. I used to. Not anymore. He gave a thin smile, leaning closer just enough for only me to hear. Are you testing your limits or mine? Both, I said softly, like dropping a marble on the floor. By afternoon, my inbox was flashing nonstop. Urgent. Need updated charts. Urgent. Slide for internal TV. Urgent. Early submission for governor's schedule. I opened each one and replied with the same line, no extra period. Please refer to section 4.2, SLA. I will deliver on schedule. No one replied. Some switched to sending me smiley emojis instead. I didn't respond to emojis. Data doesn't need feelings. At 5, Victor called me in, though. Sunlight hit the glass wall, carving his face into sharp lines. The report's late, he said. I submitted it exactly as scheduled. The state wants it earlier. You need to be flexible. If you want earlier, I said slowly, we'll need a new contract addendum. He froze for a second, then gave a short laugh. You're teaching me how to work now? No, just reading what you signed. My tone wasn't loud, but something in it made him pause longer than usual. Finally, he waved me off. Fine, I'll review it. The next day, I arrived at 9 again and left on time. No one asked me to wrap things up quickly. No one dared send me draft slides. The room had gone quiet, like a machine missing its backup battery. Peter stopped by, voice low. You know, when you stopped, the system finally started to make noise. I smiled faintly. Sometimes, you have to stop tightening the bolts to hear which ones actually hold. Midweek, I spent an afternoon cleaning the data archive. Every script, every procedure, every guideline, sorted, labeled, and stored in the shared drive with transparent access. No one is dependent on engineer goodwill. At the end of the file, I added one line. If you want the system to run itself, start by respecting the process. No one said anything, but a few days later, I noticed Kayla highlighting her copy of the contract. The yellow lines glowed across her desk. Technical responsibilities exclude internal communications. On Friday, Victor sent an email. Need report 24 hours early for media prep. I replied, we can amend the schedule via an addendum. Otherwise, I'll deliver as planned. 10 minutes later, a meeting invite popped up. Review of schedule addendum. For the first time, legal was on the attendee list. That afternoon, wind from the bay pressed against the glass. Across the hall, I saw Kayla pinning up a poster that read, Spirit of Teamwork. The background was the Bayview Bridge shining in the sun. I smiled, softly, not bitterly. Just enough to realize I'd stopped seeking validation from posters. At 5, I shut down my computer, packed my things, and stepped out. Victor was talking to someone near the door. When I walked past, he stopped me. You know, if everyone did their job exactly like you, nothing around here would get done. I stopped but didn't turn. You're right, but at least it wouldn't collapse. He said nothing. I kept walking, my heels tapping evenly against the floor. Light metal rhythm. Precise. No wasted beat. The following Monday, I arrived again at 9. The office was quiet. No one joked about Delaney Standard Time anymore. Peter looked up and gave me a small nod. Feels strange, he said. Everything's on time, but something's missing. Missing people to pick up the slack, I said. Now everyone has to hold their own piece of steel. He smiled and turned. Back to his screen. By afternoon, Victor called an emergency meeting. We're 2 days behind our usual pace, he said. No one responded. Everyone just looked at each other. I stayed silent. After a pause, his voice softened. Maybe we've just gotten too used to her doing everyone's part. I looked toward the window, where the late sun reflected off the steel of the bridge in the distance. The bridge still stood. The office had started to crack, and for the first time they understood the value of being adequate. 7:00 in the morning, an urgent meeting alert popped up. Bayview Bridge, pre-opening stability review. The conference room on the third floor was bright and cold like an X-ray chamber. Victor stood at the head of the table, voice polished smooth as freshly cut steel. The state wants to open the bridge by the weekend, he said. We need stability numbers. Kayla switched on the slide deck. Blue background, steep bars, flawless trendline. I looked at the vertical axis. The unit was mils, but the scale didn't match last month's data. She said, we filtered noise and adjusted outliers to reflect the positive trend. I asked, show me the filter parameters and the seed. Silence filled the room. Kayla smiled slightly. Those are internal details, Delaney. We're talking big picture here. I only need the picture if it's drawn with real numbers, I said. What seed value? Alpha coefficient? How long is the sliding window? Victor tapped his pen on the table. No need to get that technical. There is, I said. If the axis is bent, the picture looks flat. I opened the orange data case and set the drive on the table. The small click sounded like the period on a sentence. Synchronize with NIST time, I said. These timestamps can't be altered. Victor exhaled. The state needs good optics. I looked up. If the bridge fails, those optics will be broadcast nationwide. No one spoke. I laid out the raw logs, 3 points clearly above the safety threshold. On Kayla's version, they were marked outlier. I pointed to the note, trimmed mean after Windsorizing. You force the extremes toward the average, I said. But those extremes are what saved the bridge during the storm. Kayla whispered, no bad intent. It's just statistical practice. I'm not talking intent, I said. I'm talking consequence. Victor tried to steer the tone back to control. We're on the same side, the public's side. So am I said. That's why I'm keeping the axis straight. A young engineer muttered, seed fixed at 42, not rotating. Everyone turned to him. I nodded. Thank you. The meeting ended in silence. I gathered the logs and locked the orange case. 2-page report. Facts only. No adjectives, I said as I walked out. Back at my desk, an email appeared. From Kayla. Subject, cooperation, blocking communications. She had CC'd the entire executive board. Delaney refused to cooperate, requested unnecessary technical parameters, delaying progress. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened the orange case again, cross-checked the raw logs with her version. The 3 breaches stood out like cracks under light. I noted, Windsorizing at 95% masked structural edge behavior. The report was 2 pages. No color, no bold text. Page 1, comparison table. Page 2, technical recommendations. Recommendation, postpone opening until post-nor'easter inspection is completed. I sent it. To Victor, CC. Legal, PR, Project Board. 4 lines, no adjectives. Attached, raw versus prepared data. 3 excursions above threshold. Filtering parameters, fixed seed. Recommendation noted, send. The soft swoosh of the email sliced through the quiet like a blade. 5 minutes later, Kayla replied in the same thread. Thank you, Delaney, for your input, but the communications team must maintain coherence. I started typing. The only coherence that doesn't betray the public is truth. Then deleted it. Sent only. Received. Outside, clouds thickened and dropped lower. The wind from the bay slammed the glass, carrying the metallic, salty scent I knew too well, the smell of a nor'easter. At 11:45, Victor called a smaller follow-up meeting. "We're in the public phase," he said. "The state needs a good story." "A good story won't keep the bridge standing," I answered. Kayla cut in. "Instruments can be wrong too." "I calibrated with NIST," I said. "If needed, we can call in independent inspectors." The phrase "open the orange case" made everyone freeze. They all knew what it meant, that the case contained nationally certified logs, and opening it would expose every edit. Victor leaned forward, voice low. "Delaney, if you block this rollout." "I'm not blocking," I said. "I'm just setting a speed limit at the top of a hill." No one spoke after that. By afternoon, Kayla launched a message coordination meeting. I didn't attend. Instead, I went down to the control room to check 3 sensors manually. Numbers don't lie. Vibration increased by 0.07 mils at the midspan, exactly what the raw log had shown. I took photos, wrote them down, and sent the readings to the technical team. CC, no one. When I returned to my desk, another email awaited. Delaney continues to disengage from collaboration. I didn't extend the thread. I sent 4 lines to the full list. Add technical appendix per clause 7.4. Parameters required for data integrity. Not under the communication scope. Ready for independent verification. This time, only legal replied, "Acknowledged." I smiled. Finally, someone read the contract. By 4:30, the sky darkened early. I stood by the window. The wind from the bay struck the glass, groaning like steel breathing. The nor'easter had arrived sooner than forecast. My phone buzzed. Message from Peter. "If they open lanes tomorrow, I'm not signing the clearance." "Good," I texted back. "Keep the crew in the safe zone. I've already recommended a delay." I turned the phone face down. The room was filled only with the soft hum of the cooling fans and the yellow glow of the orange case. I didn't need them to believe me. I just needed the data to speak. And as the wind began to howl across the bay, I knew the real storm was finally coming, not on the bridge, inside this building. The phone rang at 8:12 in the morning. The screen read, "Office of the Governor." The aide's voice was calm, rehearsed. "We need the bridge open before the evening news." I looked out the window at the bay, veiled in salt mist. "Bayview is still inside the nor'easter wind window," I said. "The technical recommendation is to wait for post-storm inspection." A pause. Then that same even voice, quieter now. "We need a positive image." The call ended. 5 minutes later, Victor walked in, tie crooked, face heavier than the wind outside. "If you stand in the way," he said, "you end your own career." I just nodded. People who believe in a true axis don't change their tone when the wind shifts. By noon, I was at a small cafe in Fells Point, where the breeze from the bay mixed the smell of salt and roasted coffee. At the back table, 2 people were waiting. Their business cards read, "Harborspan Institute." The woman introduced herself. "Maris Lang, Regional Director. This is Henry, Chief Inspector." Maris didn't waste time. "We'd like to offer you the role of Director of Engineering. Independent authority, no polished data, full access to cameras and sensors in real time. You make the calls, not politics." I stayed quiet long enough to hear the coffee grinder hum. "Can you give us an answer now?" Henry asked. "I still owe a bridge to the public," I said. Maris nodded. "That's a good enough answer. If you ever need an independent witness, call us." On the wall behind her, an old poster read, "Safety is not an act, it's a habit." I thought of the steel gauge in my drawer and its own habit of telling the truth. When I returned to the office, my inbox was bursting. Press release, Bayview. Overcomes the storm, ready for opening. Kayla had sent it to the entire executive team, attached with a photo of the project group smiling under the bridge. My name wasn't there, but one sentence made my stomach tighten. After completing all necessary inspections, the project has achieved a stable condition. Necessary inspections. the same logs that had been Windsorized at 95%. 2 minutes later, Kayla's private email arrived. Delaney, don't make this hard for us. We need a good story tonight. I replied, the bridge needs good data. Not another word. 15 minutes later, Victor sent a meeting invite. Image coordination. I responded on the calendar, out of scope. 3 minutes later, another email came in. 2 short lines. Pending review. Suspension notice. 1 page. Short. Cold. Temporary suspension due to interference with messaging. I read it twice, then set the paper beside the orange case. Outside, the wind grew louder. I left the building before closing time. Peter caught up to me, hard hat tilted, breath heavy with salt air. They suspended you? Temporarily, I said. What if they force an opening? Tomorrow? I'll still be there, I replied. I won't sign, but I'll be there. He was silent for a moment, then said quietly, my crew will stand on the technical side. No cameras, just procedure. Good, I said. Keep everyone within the safety zone. The road home followed the docks. Mooring ropes hit the wooden hulls with a hollow knock, like the storm itself was knocking. Evan opened the door, hair tousled, eyes bright. Mom, I'm building a bridge model. The teacher said to simulate wind. I laughed. Real wind's coming too. In the kitchen, the kettle whistled softly. Evan looked up, serious. What if the bridge falls? I rested my hand on his shoulder, thin as a small beam needing reinforcement. When adults do things wrong, sometimes kids pay the price, I said quietly. That's why I'll do my part right. He nodded. I helped him place sandbags on the model. When the wind rises, vibrations rise too, I said. But the bridge stands if you use the right material and stop at the right time. Like when you said, set the speed limit at the top of the hill? I smiled. Exactly. After Evan fell asleep, the house was filled only with the sound of the wind. I spread all the logs across the table, sorting them by time, labeling each color tag, Sensor 4B, Midspan, South Bearing. Each bundle was tied with cloth, marked Bayview, pre-opening, nor'easter window. I opened the orange case, placed the hard drive into a shock-proof bag, along with a USB summary, 2 pages. Everything was there, timestamps, filter parameters, wind direction, water levels. Nothing left to adjust. The phone buzzed, a new voicemail. A man's voice, introducing himself as a representative from the governor's office, hoping for constructive cooperation. I listened, then deleted it. Shared responsibility doesn't mean bending the data axis. On the front of the main file, I wrote 3 lines. Do not open lanes if vibration exceeds the threshold. Do not replace stable with acceptable. Do not let optics decide safety. The pen stopped. In the reflection of the kitchen glass, my face blurred through the steam, not angry, not afraid, just focused, like an engineer before a stress test. I turned off the lights, leaving only the desk lamp shining gold on the orange case. Outside, the nor'easter roared, pulling the city into the story they wanted to broadcast. And I had my own headline, 2 pages, no adjectives. Tomorrow morning, I'd take the orange case to the bridge. If they wanted to open the lanes, they'd have to pass through these numbers first. If they wanted a good image, they'd have to look straight at the steel that breathes. I closed the case. The click echoed. A full stop for every coat of polish. And a new sentence for the storm that was coming. The storm arrived 6 hours earlier than forecast. By 5 in the morning, the nor'easter was tearing through the bay, bending the line of lights along the shore. The wind screamed through the bridge's towers like steel in pain. I still went to the site, suspended or not. My safety vest still carried the Bayview logo. I hadn't removed it. An engineer doesn't need a title to see danger. Bayview Bridge appeared through the gray fog, long and bare like a scar across the water. Red warning lights blinked rhythmically, cold and mechanical. The technical crews moved fast, radio chatter breaking apart under the wind, every sentence fractured midair. Peter spotted me, eyes wide. You actually came? They said you were suspended. I'm not signing anything, I said. I'm just here. We stood at the railing, the wind tilted sideways, rain slashing across, salt water stinging our faces like needles. On the monitor, the vibrations climbed. Sensor 4B just passed 0.10 mils, Peter said. Outer winds are only starting, I replied. The peak isn't here yet. At 9:15, Victor appeared. Black raincoat, radio in hand, voice cutting through the storm. Press is waiting. Open a test lane. Get some footage. Peter turned around. It's not safe, Victor glared. The state wants good news, not another report. I stepped forward into the wind. The steel beneath my boots trembled, wet and cold. From my pocket, I pulled out the steel crack gauge, the same one I'd carried for 5 years. Kneeling, I set it against the main joint. The needle shook, then steadied, landing exactly at 0.09. My voice was calm, carrying even over the roar. This wasn't a setback, it was an opportunity. An opportunity to repair from the core, not repaint the surface. Victor stared at me, part shock, part fury. What the hell are you doing? Proving why this bridge isn't ready. The wind howled harder, waves rose. I grabbed the radio. Stop all test traffic, close the lanes, now. Victor shouted, You don't have authority. No, I said. But I have data. A convoy of gray vehicles appeared at the far end of the bridge. Federal Structural Integrity Division. Inspectors. They'd come sooner than I expected. The lead woman, thick coat and name badge reading S. Alvarez, held up a federal clearance order. We received conflicting data reports from the Bayview project, she said. She looked at me. You're Moore? I'm the one who sent the national standard logs. Alvarez nodded. Good. We'll need access to both data sets, yours and communications. Victor went pale. She's suspended. Her data isn't valid. Alvarez didn't even turn his way. I'm not asking about contracts. I'm asking about accuracy. Peter carried the orange case over. I set it on the inspection truck and connected the cable. 2 sets of logs appeared side by side on the monitor. Alvarez studied the lines. Kayla's file, fixed seed, static filter, timestamp offset by 0.7 seconds. Moore's, NIST synced, unaltered. Her tone was steady, deliberate. We confirm that Delaney Moore's dataset is original. All subsequent edits are invalid. No one spoke. The wind whipped the tarp overhead. Victor gripped the radio, lips moving without sound. At 10:20 Alvarez issued the order. Bridge closed. No vehicles, no media. The central beam is exceeding limits at 45 miles per hour. She turned to me. Thank you for preserving the raw logs. I just nodded. Out on the water, white foam broke against the piers. Applause from the cold. A reporter stood at a distance, camera wrapped in plastic, trying to film the team braving the storm. Kayla appeared in a red raincoat, face stiffening when she saw the federal crew. We're handling it, she stammered. Alvarez raised her hand. No statements at this time. Kayla looked at me, panic flooding her eyes, the first time she realized that no headline could save corrupted data. Inside the control center, chaos. The 6 o'clock news broadcast was canceled. Bayview Bridge was officially listed as under review. Victor tried to steady his voice during the impromptu briefing. It's a minor discrepancy. The media might misunderstand. Alvarez replied, Numbers don't misunderstand. They're either right or wrong. Kayla whispered, I only adjusted them to make it look stable. Alvarez turned to her. You altered federal infrastructure data? That's a violation of the law. You understand that? Kayla fell silent. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. Outside, the wind began to ease, but no one in the room moved. Even breathing felt cautious. One young engineer, the same one who'd been on shift the night I saved the bridge years ago, spoke softly. If she hadn't been here, we'd all be underwater right now. No one laughed. No one argued. The data had spoken. By evening, the storm had passed. Puddles streaked the bridge like long ink stains. Alvarez signed the closure report. The red seal hit the paper with a sharp, final sound. I wiped down the crack gauge, cleaned the water off, and placed it back into the orange case. Victor walked past without a word, without a glance. I understood silence can be punishment or recognition. I left the bridge as dawn broke gray. Headlights skimmed across the wet surface, catching every cable, every beam, every hairline tremor now laid bare. I didn't feel triumphant, only a calm, level stillness, the kind that comes after the axis has been set straight. That night, I reopened the old email from Harborspan. The subject line was still the same. We'd like to talk. I hadn't answered before, but for the first time in years, I knew I wouldn't have to prove anything with words. Because justice sometimes doesn't come with a gavel. It comes with a vibration reading of 0.09 mils, perfectly aligned with the national standard. I never went back to Bayview after the storm. There was no reason to. Once the data had spoken, my presence would only echo what was already clear. A week later, the official offer from Harborspan Institute arrived. This time, it didn't say, "We'd like to talk." It said, "Welcome to the team." I read the contract carefully. White paper, black text. No slogans, no glossy photo of a bridge glowing in sunlight. I added 4 conditions by hand, short and cold, without decoration. 1. Public dashboard delayed by 24 hours for review and verification. 2. Camera data visible to the public, no exposure correction, no cropped frames. 3. All local engineers retrained in independent analysis procedures. 4. I won't sign if any minimum criteria are missing. I sent it back without a thank you note. 3 hours later, they signed. The new office sat in Fells Point, second floor of a red brick building overlooking the bay. No signboard, no receptionist, just a small steel plaque that read Structural Integrity Division, Harborspan. On my first morning, I stepped inside. The window faced east, morning light glinting off the steel crack gauge on my desk. The only thing I'd brought from Bayview. It rested there, quiet and cold, a reminder that precision deserves respect. A thin folder waited on the desk. My first assignment: inspect the network of auxiliary bridges on the southern bay, which locals called the Nameless Bridges. No cameras, no press, just engineering. And me. That afternoon, while I was reviewing logs, the door opened. Peter walked in, same reflective vest, hard hat in hand. "I'm transferring here," he said. I looked up, surprised. "Why?" "Because I want to do it right," he said, smiling. "I'm done chasing the evening news." He placed a signed transfer packet on the table. "I didn't bring much," he said. "Just some bridge experience and what little faith I've got left." I nodded. "That's enough." A few days later, 2 young engineers from the Bayview team sent emails asking to join. Their message was short: "We want to relearn how to measure correctly." No one mentioned the past. No one needed to. Every morning, we began with a single rule: don't rush to be believed. Be right to be remembered. I built the public dashboard. Each dataset went live 24 hours late, not to hide, but to let a human verify it before algorithms could polish away the truth. Peter asked, "Can the public see the live camera feed?" "Of course," I said. "They have the right to see what we see." "All of it? Even the errors?" "Especially the errors." Technical integrity isn't about hiding vibration. It's about explaining it correctly. In the first month, we trained the local engineers, the ones who'd once been told to record numbers and send them up the chain to be cleaned. I showed them Bayview's raw logs, the 3 points, that had been trimmed away. "This," I said, "is the difference between a bridge that stands and a bridge that falls." A young woman asked, "But won't the state hate us for it?" I smiled. "Maybe, but if the bridge collapses, they'll need us." The room went silent. I looked at their faces, young, sharp, uncertain, and saw myself years ago when I thought silence meant weakness. Now I know it's the beginning of discipline. By mid-February, HarborSpan released its first report. Title: Integrity Log, Not for Show. No photos, just clean charts and one line beneath them. When steel breathes, we listen. Feedback flooded in from across the engineering community. A professor at MIT sent thanks for pioneering a new model. A few newspapers cited the data without sarcasm. For the first time in years, I read the news without frowning. One morning, as I was calibrating the sensor cameras, Maris Lang, my director at HarborSpan, stepped into the office. "Congratulations," she said. "This wants a long-term partnership. They plan to apply your model to other projects." I smiled slightly. "Funny. They once called me an obstacle to progress." Maris shrugged. "That's fine. People only hate the ones who make them face themselves." She paused. "Do you want to release a press statement?" "No," I said. "Let the data speak." That afternoon, late sunlight reflected through the glass and landed on the steel gauge. Peter walked in with a cup of coffee. "Ever think of this as revenge?" he asked. I shook my head. "No, I just rebuilt it, the right way." He nodded. "I like how you call that rebirth." "It's not rebirth," I said. "It's standing amid the ashes and still choosing the same standard." He smiled, quiet for a while, then said softly, "If anyone at Bayview had understood that, the bridge would never have fallen, even before it fell." I didn't answer. I looked out the window. The bay reflected a pale blue sky, calm and level, yet I could still hear the faint stretch of steel beneath the wind. That evening, I wrote in my work journal, "No revenge, just a restored standard." Then I closed the cover and placed the pen beside the steel gauge. The small room dimmed under the amber light of sunset. Wind from the bay drifted in, tasting of salt, not cold anymore, just clean, like the air after a storm. For the first time in years, I heard no vibration, only a faint, steady sound. The steel gauge touching the desk, firm and sure, like a quiet verdict. Technical justice can be delayed, but it can never be replaced. Delaney Moore, Director of Engineering, HarborSpan, no longer adequate, no longer asking to be believed, only right and steady as steel. 3 months after the storm, the federal investigation report was released. White cover, black title, Bayview Bridge Incident, Structural and Administrative Review. The first line was short, cold, and precise as a number. Cause: political pressure, weak data governance, verification process compromised. No translation needed. Any engineer reading it would understand. They had finally named what I once endured. Victor was removed within a week. The company issued a smooth internal statement. Mr. Crane will focus on private projects. Kayla was reassigned to internal communications, stripped of all data access. She vanished from the news cycle as if she'd never existed on any bridge. I didn't send congratulations, and I didn't feel vindicated. Justice isn't about winning, it's about what's right being recorded at last. One morning, I opened my inbox and saw an unsigned email with no address. The subject line read, "Thank you for not signing." The message contained just 7 words. "Because of you, the bridge still stands." I read it 3 times. I didn't know who sent it. Maybe Peter. Maybe an anonymous engineer from that stormy night. Or maybe a driver who crossed the bridge the next day, unaware of what they had avoided. I didn't reply. Some gratitude doesn't need an answer. It just needs to stay whole. HarborSpan's public dashboard officially launched on April 15th. No ribbon cutting, no banner. The first line of the homepage was mine, and I'd asked them to keep it forever. When steel breathes too fast, we let it rest. Every number on that screen was real, unfiltered, unedited. Beside each graph, a section called Public Notes allowed anyone to comment. Under the very first post, someone wrote, "For the first time, I trust a bridge." Peter printed that line and pinned it to the office board. He laughed. First time in my career, public feedback made me proud. I said, because this time, the public didn't praise us, they believed us. Harborspan began training more young engineers. The same girl who once asked, will the state hate us for this? Now stood at the front of a classroom, teaching how to read logs without being seduced by numbers. On her slide, I saw a small note, guided by D. Moore. I didn't step inside. I stayed by the door, listening as they spoke about data with the bright eyes of people who finally believed in their craft. That Friday, I left early. Evan was at the dining table, surrounded by wooden sticks, glue, and elastic cords, his new school bridge project. What are you working on? I asked. My project, he said, focused. It's called Integrity 1. I laughed. That sounds serious. He looked up, his face still young, but his eyes steady. You said safety starts with habit, so I named it that. I watched as he connected each joint, adjusting the angle. Did you write your presentation? Yeah, he said, holding up a page. The last line says, my mom builds safe bridges. I didn't speak. The words were short, but they hit me like standing too close to a fire. In his handwriting, I could hear the sound of the steel gauge hitting the beam, the wind screaming through wet pylons, and the silence, heavy, earned silence, that only those who've held it long enough can understand. That night, I drove to the bay. Bayview Bridge glowed again, bright against the salt air. No reporters, no cameras, just steel and wind. I walked to the center span, the spot where I'd once set the gauge. Headlights passed, reflecting off the beam like streaks of silver moonlight. I touched the railing, cold but calm. This feeling wasn't joy. It wasn't resentment. It was recognition that everything was finally aligned. A group of young engineers from Harborspan was checking sensors nearby. When they saw me, they paused. We're on night shift, one said. Still following your checklist. Good, I said. The bridge still holding? Solid as steel, he answered. I smiled. There was no applause, only the sound of waves, steady as a heartbeat. I stood there until the wind cleared the fog from the bay. The city lights reflected on the water, each one a heartbeat, a person crossing a bridge they didn't know had once nearly failed. I thought of Victor, of Kayla, of all those glowing headlines years ago, and then of the public dashboard, where justice was now measured in data, not in words. Technical justice doesn't need applause. It just needs to stand long enough for people to cross it and feel safe without knowing why. I placed my hand on the railing and whispered, Rest now, Bayview. You can sleep. The wind carried my words away, blending with the soft breath of steel. As night settled, I walked back to my car. On the passenger seat lay the old steel gauge beside a sealed folder. Streetlights cast a thin line across them, a boundary between past and future. I touched the metal, felt its cold weight beneath my hand. It wasn't a symbol of pain anymore. It was proof that silence, when held true to its axis, can carry an entire bridge, and sometimes an entire life. I drove off. Salt wind struck the windshield, leaving faint streaks like the breath of the sea. Behind me, Bayview Bridge shone bright, straight, and steady. Weekend morning. The Fells Point office was quiet, as if the whole city was still asleep after a long season of wind. Sunlight slid through the window, across the wooden desk, catching on the metal surface, thin streaks of brightness like the breath of steel. I opened the drawer. Inside lay the old crack gauge and a newly sealed data archive. One held the past, the other the future. Both weighed the same. The seal was fresh, the red ink still sharp. On the label, Harborspan, Structural Archive 001. Not Bayview, not adequate, just a record made by people who did the work right. I set the steel gauge beside the box. The metal had dulled with age, the handle polished smooth where my hand had gripped it through rain, through storms, through meetings where my voice wasn't heard. Now it didn't need to measure anymore, it just needed to rest. On the desk lay a folded letter, no name, no sender. Just one line. Thank you for not signing. I read it again, maybe for the 100th time. The paper was creased at the corner, probably by my own hand. I folded it carefully and placed it on the data box. Outside, a crane's horn echoed from the bay. Through the window, I saw a new beam being lifted, morning light tracing its surface, bright enough to look self-illuminated. I stood by the frame, breathing in the salt air, cold but clean. Every new project is a chance to redraw the map, not to erase old mistakes, but to understand why they existed. I whispered softly enough that only the steel could hear. Some bridges once burned stay ash. Some bridges burn not to destroy, but to light the map. Some mistakes don't need burial. They just need illumination, so the next builder knows where not to step. I sat down and opened my laptop. The final cut of the podcast was ready. My voice, low and steady, came through the small speakers. If you've ever been told you weren't ready for a promotion, a pause, exactly where I'd told the engineer to place it. Silence there wasn't for effect. It was for the listener to hear their own breath. Tell me what city you're listening from. On screen, the map bloomed with dots, each one a person, a city. Chicago, Denver, Portland, Houston. People once sidelined, labeled adequate, are now sending their coordinates into that map of shared endurance. My recorded voice went on, firm but quiet. This wasn't a setback. It was an opportunity. When you do the right thing long enough, silence becomes sound, and that sound is as strong as steel. I stopped playback. The room fell silent. But in that silence, I could hear my heartbeat, calm, even, steady. Peter came in, coffee in hand. Have you listened to the final cut? He asked. Yes, I said. It sounds like a bridge breathing. He smiled. You know, people at Bayview still mention your name. For the first time, they're using it as a verb, to Delaney something. Means double check, before signing. I laughed. That's a good reminder. It's a warning, he said, but also a sign of respect. Not bad for someone once called adequate. I didn't answer right away. I looked out the window. The crane had lowered the new beam into place. Sunlight bounced off the water. I thought about those who had left, those who stayed, and those who never knew my name, but drove over a bridge I once kept from collapsing. All of them were living in a world held up by data that hadn't failed. Before he left, I asked, Peter, do you know what really keeps a bridge standing? Steel? He guessed. No, trust. He nodded, then stepped out, leaving the door ajar. I looked around the office, neat, quiet, bright. No awards, no plaques. Only a map on the wall marked every bridge we'd inspected. Chesapeake Bay shone brightest, like a scar stitched by the right hands. I turned off the lights, leaving only the morning glow over the desk. The steel gauge lay still beside the sealed data box, one pass closed, one future waiting. Both reflected a thin, steady light, not dazzling, but unwavering. I stepped outside onto the porch. Wind from the bay brushed my hair, tasting faintly of salt. In the distance, the sound of metal clinking, new structures rising. Each noise, to me, was testimony. My voice carried out, not through a microphone, not through speakers, just spoken to the wind. If you've ever been told you weren't ready, tell me where you're listening from. Justice doesn't need noise. It just needs one person to hold the axis, one bridge to stand, and one silence with weight. Subscribe for more stories of silent justice, where justice comes from quiet, not from applause.